Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about frame rates, frame doubling, and a little bit about compositing. Now, in traditional classic animation, most animation is done on 2s. Rarely it is done on 3s. What that means is when the cells were hand-drawn and they'd put it under the camera, they would click off 2 frames. So traditionally in video you have 30 frames per second. In film you would have 24 frames per second. If you're doing it on 2s in video, instead of 30 frames per second, you'd only get 15 drawings per second, but each drawing would be doubled. If you're doing it on 3s, each drawing would be photographed 3 times, so you get 10 frames per second. 10 is kind of rare, but it has been done, especially in the early days of really cheap Saturday morning animation. Now, in this example that I have up in front of us right now, this is a project that I'm working on using pretty much every technique discussed on this CD to get a very convincing hand-drawn look. Now, when it's rendered out, it looks like this. We have a mouse-like character. It's a subdivision surface character. It's got some line jitter going on. It's got a lot of the shading going on. It's being morphed and being distorted by bones. Now it's over black. Now the reason we see it over black is because I'm planning to composite this over a different background later. So if we zoom in on this and then switch it to our alpha channel, we can see that the edge is kind of feathered, some more than others. That's with the line jittering that gives us a softer edge. The white is solid. When this is composited over another image, wherever there is white, that will be completely solid. That will be the image that we see here. Where it is black, that is completely transparent. The underlying picture will be seen there. In between here, where it's gray, where there is some jittering, some gradient of the colors, that will be a soft transition between the transparent and the solid. Now the trick is, when we double up these frames, we want to make sure that we retain our alpha channel. Now to get on our 2s or 3s, and by the way, when you see it on 2s or 3s, it is very strange. It's a strange persistence of vision thing. It's the way that we perceive the animation. It actually will sometimes look smoother on 2s when it's attempting to be 2D. When it's on the 1s and it's trying to get the hand-drawn look, it just looks a little bit too slick. It looks a little bit too smooth. I'm sure you've seen examples of it. I find that when I do it on 2s or 3s, it gives me a much more comfortable view of looking at it as 2D. So to get every second or third frame is easy enough to do. I go to my render options. Render the first frame is 1, last frame is 60, and my step, I'm going to render every third frame. So I'm rendering every third frame. I'm saving it. I've already previously rendered these out, and you can see by telling it to do it in 3 frame steps, I have frame 1, 4, 7, 10, and so on. So I've got every third frame. Now the problem is, when I compile this as an animation, it depends on the editor. Some, or what program you're using. Most will see the first frame and recognize it as a sequence and load up all the frames, but even though they're labeled 1, 3, 7, and 10, it's going to see it as 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 20, because we've got 20 frames rendered. And if we try stretching it out, if we grab the end and say, okay, stretch out these 20 frames, make it last over 60, it'll try to interpolate between the frames and get it'll look more like a slow motion rather than a doubling up of the frames. So it's actually surprisingly bothersome to double up these frames. I'm sure you can go into a program and write a little utility that will see the frames and then double up and add them. However, we can do it right within Lightwave, using Lightwave as a frame doubler. It's a little bit of overkill to use this high-end 3D package just to, duplicate and copy frames, but we've got it and it works. So here's how we do that. I'm going to clear the scene. I'm going to load up that image sequence. Under doubling, so I load it. It sees it as a single frame. I'm going to tell it it's a sequence. All right, it gets a little confused because it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1, 3, and so on. So I have to tell it that it's really going to be going for 60 frames. Okay, and then I'll load it up. The most obvious thing would be to put it in my backdrop. And there it is. I'm going to turn on my display option so I see my backdrop image, my background image in my camera view. And there it is. Now what's happening here as we step through, okay, frame 15, we have a frame at 15. There is no frame at 16. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a frame in there. As we step through, you can see if there's not a new frame, it just keeps using the old frame. And now when I render this out, I want it to go 1 to 60. I want it to render every single frame. So I'm going to save this, create a new directory, call it doubled. It will now render it all out. It will render out a full 60 frames, even though they're doubled up. Now there is one problem here. 0.2 seconds, that's pretty fast. There is one problem here. This is our image, everything's fine. If I look at the alpha, there's nothing there. That's because images in our background do not show up in the alpha. We've lost our alpha channel. Now if we're rendering everything together, we don't care. If we've already have a background image, that's fine, we're done. But chances are we're going to want to pop this into something else. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using it as a background image, I'm going to use it as a foreground image. Take that out of there. Foreground image talk. When we render this out now we have the exact opposite problem. Everything is solid. How do we get that back? Well, we know there's an alpha channel in there, so we just have to extract it. I'm going to duplicate this and tell it to be alpha only. So there we go. And where it's in our Compositing tab, where it says foreground alpha, guess what that's for? Exactly this type of situation. I'm going to render this, and let's take a look. How about that? We have our alpha back. And let's take a close-up look here. Sure enough, we still have our nice feathering. In theory, there is no degradation of the image at all. So that, now when we render this out, and we'll just render the scene, and it will just go on and on, clicking these off. And we can see that the images are being doubled up as it's playing. And it's saving them out as 32-bit images with the alpha channel, which will allow us to bring it into another program, say After Effects or Aura or Mirage or Combustion or any of those programs, and you can do your compositing there. Now, if you have nothing else except Lightwave, and I know there's a few people out there in that situation, you can do some of your compositing in Lightwave. In fact, we can take, let's put a background image in here. So I'm just going to go to my background image, select load image, go back to my images directory. I have a couple of images. Now this is the background, and we can see it in here just because I set my display properties to show it. I render this. Sure enough, my image, my foreground image is on there. And you saw that was quick. That was almost before my finger left the button. Let's replace that image. Go to my image editor. Replace it with a different one. Render that. And now we have the country mouse. We have the city mouse and the country mouse. And this is why you want to render with 32-bit images. I could have rendered this the first time. When I was rendering the mouse itself, I could have just put this background in and rendered it all in one pass. If you're working on a limited system and limited time and you know this is what you want, that's fine. Save them out as JPEGs. Do it on 2s or 3s and you can still do the doubling up and everything will be fine. The advantage of doing it with 32-bit and an external program is it allows you to do different things and do some post-production. Let's replace this background. I have a couple of sample images called mouse comp. Okay. And I'm going to remove this. These are just things that I've already composited. Image editor, tell it it's a sequence. Now this is like the image that we saw before. It's just our foreground image over the background image. And here it is again, the foreground image over the background. It's just showing how we have the option between going to the two. Here, I added a drop shadow to the mouse. And you can see how that makes it stand out a little bit. All of a sudden this looks a little bit bland compared to this. And it also gives it a sense, maybe this was shot on a multi-layered piece of glass over a background. One more step. I painted in a little shadow, kind of a Disney-like drop shadow here. And when you do this in post-production, it allows you to do all kinds of things. It can stretch it. You can use different effects. You might want to add glow, or oftentimes I'll run a soft blur to take even more of the edge off it. I could also do color correction, or if that white is too hot, or if I need to, I can go in and erase little things. The mouth might be doing something funky. I can go in and hand paint it out, and because it's supposed to look hand painted anyway, I can get away with murder. Sometimes when you're rendering photorealism, that one part that you've touched up kind of jumps out at you. When you're working with something that looks like it's supposed to be hand drawn, you've got a lot more leeway.